Alrighty, there we go. All right, so now when the FBI comes knocking down your door, you'll know it was me. Let's see here. Let me just jump onto my MSN. It closed up on me right before you got on the Zoom here. Are you guys doing a lot of traveling internationally still for the coaching education?
It had almost come to a complete halt for 2 years, and then now we're getting some requests back again. I did Turkey, Istanbul in December. Had an Omicron cancellation in Spain for January, and then I think we'll have at least 4 lined up so far. So it's slowly starting to return. Yeah, I mean, I think we have one in Portugal this past weekend that wasn't me, obviously, but was an athletic lab course.
Gotcha, right on. Yeah, I actually signed up for the high performance certification course. I took the sample course of it. And now I'm signed up for the rest of it. So it's pretty cool to see the progressions and things that you do for the more simple weightlifting maneuvers. I'm like, oh, that's a good idea, actually.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, there we go. So honestly, kind of these are just things that I had an interest in knowing a little bit more about. They're probably not going to be so exhaustive to what your real expertise is in. I'd love to do another one of these at some point, but things that have kind of been on my mind that I could apply immediately to my training program are kind of the core development that National Academy of Sports Medicine uses. I don't know if you're familiar with any of their texts or how they do it, but I do have some stuff on my computer I could share screen if you'd like. But was wondering.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. I'm familiar with some of their older stuff, and but I haven't seen what they've released probably in the past 8 years or so. I know they were previously very heavy in like bracing and TVA activation, and I think they had to move a little bit away from that, which I think was smart. But I haven't seen the evolution of where they've gone with it.
Sure. And I think from what I used to read is that with core, since you guys use heavy enough weights and Olympic lifts and enough stuff that's loaded pretty frequently, that you didn't really put a necessity for direct core training. Really, you can't let the training do the bracing and the securing of the body. Is that accurate?
No, not really. So I do view, say, sprinting and a lot of the lifting, the kind of non-focused lifting, like your squats, your pulls, et cetera, as the basis of a lot of the core work. Almost non-direct core work is how I would look at it. We're doing that we're doing that not to address the core necessarily, but to address speed or strength. And then the byproduct is that core is developed pretty well as a result. The EMG studies that I've seen say that the highest activation is typically in activities like throwing or running. Even like long distance running has a pretty high core activation. I don't know that that's a great correlate for kind of the more speed power oriented or really hard aggressive racing that we might see in other sports, but it does kind of check a couple boxes, at least in terms of saying, okay, we don't perhaps need to do mind-numbing numbers and of ab or core work. I do some core focused work both in my weight training sessions as well as with my track group. I probably have I don't know, 6 at least four circuits that are almost wholly dedicated to kind of core, like your traditional core work, like what you'd see from the 90s, I guess, where you got moderate rep range, kind of core focused. Some of them are a little bit more blunt, I guess, that they appear to be core focused, but they're they have some like single arm planking and with various leg movements and things, and they end up looking like core, but end up being somewhat of a whole body stability type of routine. And I can actually I can share with you our inventory that I'll use on those, and you'll get a sense of it. But I would say my program sounds like you're familiar, would be like are we kind of coming at this from the framework of track and field, I'm assuming?
Usually kind of everything, because I would assume that track and field is a little bit more of a focus on the prime movers, and you're not twisting and turning quite as much. I don't know if that's an accurate assessment of it, but yeah, track and field mainly like multiple or maximum velocity and acceleration training. Right. But I do work with a variety of athletes, so it's all types of sports.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I have my two ends of the extreme, where I wear two different masks. Basically, one would be like my track and field group. I train them 6 days a week, as much as 20 hours a week. I really have the time and the luxury to do whatever I want with them. We do our heavy hitter weight training and speed work on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Typically on those weight training days, I would put in what I'd call accessory core work. So it's a loaded type of core session, or loaded type of core exercise, typically paired with some form of posterior chain work. So for example, we might do RDLs, which is kind of core, really, if you think about it. And then that might be paired with perhaps a rotation plate walk, or something that would be a core type of activity that's either higher force or higher speed, lower rep range. So maybe 2 to 3 sets, as little as 5 to 10 repetitions on a given exercise. Sometimes that's where we'll involve really explosive rotational work or anti-rotational work, that kind of thing. And then on our Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturdays, so we're basically alternating the days of high neuromuscular demand and low neuromuscular demand. On those Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays, those days might have your kind of traditional old school core on them, typically in the form of one circuit that could be completed in about 5 to 6 minutes. These are where we're seeing exercises typically done in a series. So maybe like 12 different exercises or 15 exercises done consecutively for somewhere in the range of 12 to 20 repetitions on each one, or 20 to 30 seconds. So sometimes I scale up by repetitions. Sometimes I scale up over the course of a cycle based on the duration of the activity. And then what I'm doing there is just making sure we cover all our bases. So I think with a core quote unquote, I don't know if there's a best terminology for it. I know that that actual name itself has kind of got poo-pooed over the years. I think I've always taken, not only with this, but with everything, almost like a anti-dogmatic, anti-polarized view of like, I think there's a time and a place for everything. And, no, you don't want to do 10-minute planks. That's a waste of your time, but you also don't want to throw out the plank altogether. No, don't just treat the core or your squats and your deadlifts and your sprinting as your sufficient core stimulus, because it's almost completely bracing, so you might get the muscle activation, but you don't really get a similar type of movement patterns as you might see in more complex activities like jumping and throwing. So I'm trying to cover all my bases there. The Monday, Wednesday, Friday, where it's integrated into our heavier weight training sessions, it's high load, high velocity. And again, I'd say it's a balance between stability or bracing, I guess, and then movement based. So we have 3 days there. We might do 2 of one and 1 of the other format. And then oftentimes I'm trying to address core as in all planes, I guess is the way to think of it. So, the really old school focus tends to be like on your show muscles, your 6-pack, rectus abdominis. But I think that's probably the area that gets the most EMG activity with your really basic type of movements, that in the lumbar spine area. So, anytime we can work in the rotators or anti-rotators, and, I don't do any direct TVA work, which I know is integrated in the NASM, but we will actually do some breathing work, and there is some what I call general strength body weight exercises that would work on kind of the sucking in action, so to speak, of the TVA. And cores, that midline area from the pecs down through the hips is pretty complex. We've got effectively a pulley system in many different planes on both sides of the pelvis. So simply addressing it one way is probably not going to cut it. So it's I'm not throwing my eggs into any one basket. We're basically addressing the core in any way we can, from high rep, low rep, rotation, anti-rotation, and almost treating it no differently than any other kind of muscle group in the body, where if you want a holistic development, you need to train it holistically, high load, low volume, and high volume, low load, with varying ranges at different points of the year. And I have, as I said, I have probably four to six circuits that are like fully dedicated to the core, not just anterior core though, but there's some lateral, posterior core as well. I'll kind of sometimes chunk in the glutes in there. So I think anything that does act on that lumbopelvic hip complex that can kind of affect the orientation and stability, I'd kind of lump that in there. Anything that will help preserve spinal alignment, especially lumbar spinal alignment, that's where I'm kind of thinking we need to address it in this holistic way. So that's glutes, maybe to a lesser extent hamstring, the obliques, and all your lateral core are QL and erector spinae, your rectus abdominis, and maybe to a lesser extent TVA. So it's very much, I guess, holistic is the way to look at it. There's a lot of times there's core hidden in the session, as well. So I kind of cringe at like the latest fad of basically just taking a crap on traditional core work. I don't think it's warranted. Likewise, I think you need to address the other side of it too. So I'm very weary of these big shifts in what becomes popular, unless we have a lot of evidence to the contrary. I think it's better to play it safe, I think, than to put all your cards in one spot.
For sure. And it's having trouble finding those progressions they have, but basically what they do is they go for like the small muscles in between the spine. I think they call them intraspinal development, or they have a word for it. Then they go into core strength, or that's called core stabilization. They have multiple phases. I don't know if you remember that about NASM, but they have like a prescribed setup of phases: stabilization, strength, and power. And they bring strength into like 3 or 4 categories. But it's stabilization. I want to say they do regular kind of core exercises that you've seen kind of from the 90s and stuff like that. Then they do explosive kind of stuff, or what they call explosive is like a sit up into a med ball throw or an overhead throw, or tosses. Do you think there necessarily has to be a development where you start out with something small and kind of going inside the spine outwardly and then do explosive stuff?
In hearing that actually is quite similar to the what I was familiar with, and what I'd probably say is that my overall impression of NASM, and I haven't taken the full course, but I was quite familiar with it 10 plus years ago, was they spend a little bit too much time doing remedial corrective type of work. And I always got the impression that if me and my evil twin coach were given two sets of twins to coach, and I coach the way I'm currently coaching and he coaches the NASM way, that we're going to get ahead a lot quicker. And if the training is, relatively comprehensive and holistic, and you're not kind of just doing your deadlifts and squats as your core exercise, that you're going to address those little tiny muscles. I don't know that there's any evidence to suggest that you can really you can overlook those muscles. So like they have to be addressed. They have to be addressed even while you're addressing these other activities. So as long as otherwise, though, I think that progression makes sense. Like it is a little bit tricky, and this is not a knock against NASM. I would say this is kind of something that you always have to be observant of, is that the progressions, this probably holds true even to some extent with the CHPC course, is that if you look at these courses, is that what we're trying to do is provide you with a framework, right? And sometimes it can be really easy to get boxed into that framework. And one of the things that I will frequently tell our younger coaches is that you need to know the rules if you're a young coach before you should ever attempt to break them. And it sounds like you're very familiar with and heading in have your own framework and direction and everything else like that. But I think these rules or guidelines like NASM serve a purpose, and outside of the working on the very small kind of stabilizers of the spine and focusing on those, I think that I would largely be in agreement with that framework. And that would be very similar to what I was saying of like treat the midline, the core, just how you would treat the rest of the body, right? Like, can you move efficiently? Okay, let's move efficiently with load. Okay, let's move efficiently with load faster, or let's move really fast ballistically. And I think that's a pretty safe progression. Safe not only in terms of leading to the best performance, having like a supplementary, each phase having a supplementary effect on the following one, but also safe in terms of not getting too intense too quick and potentially risking injury or something like that. So NASM, I think the really low intensity stuff probably isn't warranted outside of maybe some rehabilitative type of settings. Mm-hmm. I'm all for progression. I love following like a start to end progression, but when you spend too much time doing things that are too unrelated to the actual activity that you're training for, you're in trouble. You're going to spend a lot of time on things that are not measurable and don't lead to appreciable gains in performance. And I think even in the best case scenario, with the long-term athlete development, we're still on a ticking clock. Can you waste 6 months working on these little tiny muscles? Not probably with any athletes that I work with. So it should be included invisibly, so to speak, I think, but I wouldn't spend a lot of time on it.
Gotcha. And would you say that for more of the scholastic prep kids that are like younger, or even down to the elementary school level, that might be better use of it, and that will have a place versus kind of the more trained and seasoned athletes, especially when you consider with prep and scholastic kids, you may get maybe 3 months with them for 3 days a week, depending on if you're trying to have a business versus an in-school program. I've got an after-school program where I see them once a week for track and field for speed ice, throw together 50 yards of mats that we were able to fundraise and have them sprint. I'll get them for an hour. Do you think that working on some of that, if you're not able to get the holistic approach of squats, deadlifts, Olympic lifts, might be wise to some of those corrective exercise things that they even recommend outside of the core or the core development that's more baby step and minor moving muscles?
Are you, so like with the younger kids, you're saying maybe focus on that more?
Yeah, focus on it more.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, we have a younger kids program, and it is, what we try to do is incorporate a variety of different movement patterns. And even there, I think I think we're addressing it invisibly again. So what I mean by that is when, if you're getting kids to move in ways that are probably not typical of your standard sagittal plane movements, or even say things that they might be exposed to in that level of sport, that that you start to develop those muscles already. So
Right.
I don't think you want to go to the heavy squats and deadlifts and that kind of thing with the younger kids, but I do think you will address a lot of the concerns by doing things like crawling and climbing and different types of locomotive patterns, more so than you'll probably do with like a really focused work. The one kind of looping this back and to where I started was that when I have my track guys, the context that I was giving is I have them for 20 hours a week and I control all aspects of the training. And that means that I can literally create this, I can do pretty much whatever I want. If I think it is of value, we train well beyond the point of limiting returns on everything because of the nature of the sport, right? Mm-hmm. You're in a sport where 0.02 of a difference is a huge difference in some events. On the other side of the spectrum, I have a handful of pro football, basketball, and women's soccer team that I work with. And there, on that side of the extreme, I might see them 2 times a week for 1 hour, similar to your setup. And I don't even see them year round, right? So some of my basketball guys, I don't see them in season. I see them when they come back in the off season. So 3 to 4 months for 2 to 3 times a week for 45 minutes to an hour. So there I've got 45 minutes. And even though these athletes might be pro from a physical development standpoint, they're actually not all that high level. They're good at what they do, but they oftentimes have trouble doing basic body weight squats or pull-ups or anything like that. So they're not like super advanced physically. And even with that setup, what I'm effectively doing is creating a hierarchy. So in your case, and it sounds like similar to some of my pro team sport athletes, I've got them only for such a limited period of time relative to what I have my track guys with before. So what I'm doing is creating this hierarchy, and I call it the burning house list, or the deserted island list, right? So if you create this kind of thought experiment and saying, hey, if my house was burning, what am I going to take, right? If I'm stuck on a desert island for the rest of my life and I don't know if anybody's going to come with me, what 2 or 3 things am I going to take? And I've basically got 3 hours with these guys a week for 4 months. What am I going to do in that time? What's going to have the greatest effect? And a dedicated, say, intraspinal core work is probably not where I'm going to put it in there. I'm actually more likely to put it into the track guys because we've already taken the big boxes to their extreme, and now I might have a little bit more time. I just have not found that the athletes are at a risk of, say, injury or moving outside of the appropriate progression if we skip that phase and address it through more general means like varied locomotive work, odd position type of activities like crawling and climbing and things like that. So yeah, it's a little kind of a roundabout answer to say I don't think it isn't in my top 10, that's for sure, to do that kind of work. I do have like one of the circuits in that inventory that I've referenced a couple times kind of is one of those small muscle group of the spine, pelvis, your spinal stabilizers. And I probably use it once a year, to be honest, 1 cycle a year for some of my track guys. And oftentimes I put it when everything else is getting really, really specific, like getting heavy in the squats and, into speed endurance on the sprints and things like that. And to offset the specificity of one area of training, I'm actually putting in like really, really general pelvic stabilizing work in another area of the training. So, yeah, I mean, again, I view all training, but this would be a good example of it through the lens of, through that burning house analogy. You know, what is my bang for my buck there? If I exclude it, am I going to have a big negative? And I personally haven't found that I would.
Sure. Absolutely. I like that. It's a good analogy. I'll have to remember that one. That's a good takeaway. With those muscle imbalances, they do try to correct through NASM. If you don't have the kind of time to do comprehensive weights and you're doing not even just with the prep kids, but just with like young adults, 16 up, a little bit of the college population, would you say it is worth it doing their corrective exercise routines to fix those muscle imbalances? And I don't know how I feel about their assessments for it. They talk about how you should squat. There's going to be like in a straight line. The way that I see it is maybe it'd be nice to see if you have the ability to do it to assess an imbalance, but you shouldn't be lifting that way per se. Do you think it is worth it to go back some of those corrective exercises if you don't get a well-balanced approach? I say you're doing the desert island or house on fire routine where you're just taking an hour of speed, maybe an hour of weights and doing it 2 or 3 times a week. Do you think it's probably worth it to go back and do some of their corrective exercise routines? They have all certifications on it, to be honest. That's kind of
right. Yeah, I've seen some of those. What I would say is like, if we just very blanketly talk about corrective exercises as kind of the things that NASM have popularized and maybe to a lesser degree FMS certifications, I'm not a huge fan of them. I with my soccer groups and my basketball groups, we will incorporate some of that into the warm-ups. Some of the banded exercises, the isolation type of exercises. There is a very little bit of research to suggest that while the idea of a muscle kind of completely shutting off is not possible, it is possible to have inhibited neural drive there. And you could conceivably increase it by some specific activation work. Now, whether you're going to get a better activation of that muscle with that really isolated work than you would with kind of very blunt movement type work like a heavy squat or something like that is probably not proven yet. But if I did have someone that was say not a good mover or appeared to need corrective exercises by that standard, I might conceivably put it in. I think the better way that I would think of it is why is the training that I'm doing not already addressing these imbalances? So for certain, I have, the populations that I work with are not terribly different from a lot of other individuals. I've worked across age group in high school and college, and now I'm pretty much working in the pro level, but I still see those other populations. And what I would say is like, I get the same guys that you get in who are like maybe a good athlete, but they don't move well, or, some guy who's like moves perfectly. And so there's a mix of everything. It's not like I get a totally different demographic. And what I would say is that the way that I try to design the training program is that we're addressing all of those things, even in ways that they might not specifically see. So our warm-ups are typically with the track guys as long as 45 or 50 minutes. Even with my team sport athletes, we're warming up for a good 12, 15 minutes. And it's very, very focused work to address the things that I think are important. And it's not just going through the motions and raising core body temperature, but addressing kind of commonalities of movement dysfunction. For some, a lot of times I'm working in larger group settings, so maybe 30 athletes at a time, and I can't say pinpoint a corrective, quote unquote, corrective exercise for each individual. What I'm doing is like addressing the biggest potential issues, the most common issues across everybody, basically. So, whether that's in my selection of dynamic flexibility or hurdle mobility work, with how I assess movement quality in our weight room. I'm really using everything that we do, from like warm up through the sprinting, of course, and plyometrics in the weight room as a technical exercise. I mean, my observation is that people tend to focus on kind of these slower things, and oftentimes the less meaningful things that they can see are done poorly. Like, say, an experienced coach might really harp on a push-up being done poorly, or a body weight squat, right? But the outcome of a poorly done push-up or poorly done body weight squat is just inefficiency. It will probably carry over when they put a load on their back or something, but they're not going to hurt themselves really with a poorly done body weight squat. But I'm really trying to coach everything, even the higher velocity stuffs, in terms of their movement proficiency. So whether it's plyometrics or the weight room, or even we do those core circuits, I'm trying to teach body position. So it should be addressed elsewhere if it is not explicitly a corrective exercise. That is one of the outcomes, so a lot of times we don't do this focused corrective exercise work that you sometimes see with NASM and FMS. But I think the outcome is the intent is the same. The outcome is what would be desired from those programs, but the actual implementation of how we would correct is less laser focused, but I have found has a very positive outcome. So we're not really doing kind of mini band exercises and all kinds of other little things like that, or kind of different bird dogs and planks and things. And I'm just hesitant to do that, especially now that I've started to work in higher level populations. My question comes up in my mind is like, hey, I've got these say you got an NFL guy and he squats 600 pounds for 5 reps and he moves it fast, and his knee sometimes caves or something like that when he does a broad jump. For sure, let's correct that. But is a mini band over the knees going to correct a guy who can squat 600 pounds? Probably not. I mean, we're not even reaching stimulus threshold there. So the exercises, the way that you correct has to be appropriate for the level that we're dealing with. Might work on those lower level athletes you mentioned who are like young and developing. But with someone who has any kind of training age, I'd be very skeptical of whether it could have the desired outcome. But so I'm not opposed to kind of corrective exercises as an idea. I just haven't seen much evidence to suggest that the way that what is typically associated with corrective exercises actually does what it says it will do. I think movement needs to be corrected for efficiency as best we can all the time. Mm-hmm. And to the one specific question, I also agree on squats. I don't think we should, I would like to see an athlete who could squat the way some of these people like Kelly Starrett, if you're familiar with him, or NASM suggest, with the feet square, hip width, sit straight down. I think they should have the capacity to be able to do that if they're kind of a well-oiled machine and have good movement competency. But I don't think that's how you should squat under load. I think you should be able to, that should be a safe space for you to be there. But I think when you look at, say, like hip anatomy and things like that, or the fact that everybody's a little bit different, to fit someone into this precise mold is just not appropriate. I mean, the numbers on differentials in hip architecture are just incredible. Like with something like 15 to 20% of people having FAI and not even being able to get into those positions, even if you wanted them to. So how are we gonna we can't even change that, right? Like their bony architecture is going to get into the way, going to get in the way of that, and we couldn't change it even if we want to. So it's not like if it's unchangeable, why do we concern ourselves with it. We need to figure out what an alternative solution is.
Sure.
That actually is kind of briefly, maybe this will kind of be a nice way to think of this, is that if there's a poor movement standard, like if we're not reaching the movement standard, I always kind of look at it and go like, is it changeable? All right, because if somebody had an ankle surgery and they can't deep squat because their talus is out, or they have a femoral impingement on one side and the hip won't move correctly, so they can't deep squat, or maybe they have a fused lumbar spine, or something to this effect. Putting them through these functional movement tests, they'll fail most of the time. If we can fix it, like if it's tissue based and we can fix it, soft tissue based, muscle length, neuromuscular recruitment pattern, the tendon compliancy, that kind of thing. Those are all things that we can address. If we can fix it, and then let's fix it. If we can't fix it, like it's bony structure, it is limb length ratios and things like that, then we just need to move on. Find a suitable alternative rather than just harp on it or try to fit everybody into this box that they will never fit into.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Well, I like those answers. That was pretty awesome. Let's see, I'm looking at my list, about 20 minutes. And a lot of these questions about changing up training is a lot even for me to train, just because I've been training for so long on myself that I'm starting to get bored. So I like, if I have to see a physical therapist, I'm like, hey, this is kind of fun to step up on something and twist and hold like, a thing of water jug and have them balance and do all that. It's just a matter of it has any kind of relevance that I could put in for myself, or even younger people need a little excitement, especially if they're preps. I think a lot of strength conditioning coaches nowadays, even at the high school level, pretty much know the basics of what to do with getting off that fire and getting on Strand Island. What are you taking with you to keep them fresh and excited and want them to come to you? Sometimes you need to have something a little novel for them. And I don't know, my high school coach seems to have the ability to sell you on something and believe it, and then it works because in your head you believe it. Even if and we've had issues with that. It's like, wow, you're being selective, and like, I'm like, it's like, I don't know if your science backs it up, man, but I know that you have us believing it works. So
that's right. I mean, I don't discount that at all. I came from a background where it's like science first, and over time you see how many times guys without any of that hard science or analytical background succeed, and it's because they're doing well on the, I don't know what you'd call it, humanities or buy-in, and I think that you can't underestimate that. Placebo is a really powerful thing. I don't even know if it's placebo, right? Because it is working. It's working in, but it's maybe working in spite of itself or something. So I think that's another skill set, that the holy grail is somehow having that and having the technical expertise as well.
Right. And like, this would be the part that I don't put on the YouTube that I trim out, but I've honestly, even with minor league level football players, that I'll have a connection that'll ask me for like a minor league arena team, hey, become a strength and conditioning. I'm like, okay, we're going to do the NASM style of like squat variations and lunge and matrix, even though we don't have a ton of time to speech or just that way. It's like, oh, we're doing something different. This has to work. It's something new, like something I haven't tried. It's a new stimulus to me. So, I mean, I've utilized that every now and then, even knowing that I don't have much time. I mean, like 40 minutes to sprint them up and get them some speed training into their warm up basically for a football session, and say, hey, let's do this. Like, it'll work. And I'll explain the science behind it. Like, oh, okay. And like, they get all hyped up, and sometimes that hype, I think, carries over. So I use that occasionally.
For sure.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was making a mistake, because I always thought myself was never doing that, being a sellout to the marketing end. Like, man, do what the science says, do what you know works. Don't ever do something just to like get the hype going and get people coming to you. But with my age, I'm getting bored at doing it. So I'm like, okay, a little variation will make it fun. A lot of these people have been doing it probably right for a long time, if they had anyone with half a brain organizing them in the year 2022. So let's give them a different stem and get them excited and be like, oh yeah, I've got my new secret weapon going.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I'll tell all our coaches, those that work across kids through adults and elite athletes, is that the first thing you have to do is make it fun. If you don't make it fun, then they're not going to stay with you. It doesn't matter how effective it is. If it's really effective and it's not fun, eventually they might actually leave. If it's fun, you give yourself a chance to be effective, because training responses don't happen overnight anyhow, right? You got to get somebody to 3 weeks, 3 months, whatever it is. And it's got to be enjoyable to get to that point in time, even just to be able to see the results. So if it sucks right away, or they're not having fun, then you don't even have a chance to be effective. So fun is always good. And just like sprinkling whatever,
Yeah.
I'm not a massive fan of like the bench press or anything like that, but I'll sprinkle in the bench press or sprinkle in curls or the exercise du jour, just recognizing that it's got to be the icing, not rather than the cake. It can't be the majority of your program. It's just got to be the thing that keeps some engagement going on.
Sure. And you have to go as hard as you can a lot of these reps. So if you're going through the motions because you've done it for 30 years in a row the same way, you might be a little bored and stale. I know that's what happens with me. Is I'm like, oh, this is new. Like, this is challenging me. Like, I like this. But if it's something I've always done, I just, after enough days in a row of doing it, with the time responsibilities you have in life as you get older, you're like, it's kind of an emotions like weight session. This isn't like it used to be.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, novelty, I think, is, I think in the CHPC course, we just talk about it as variation. Novelty spurs on adaptation, just simply changing things and making it more interesting. That alone is, an overlooked trigger for adaptation. So, while there's like best practices for progression and, linear progression and moving as you do with, say, an ASM or any other format, I think knowing when to put in things that will increase buy-in, or maybe just add the right amount of variation, is super important.
Yeah, probably why P90X got so good at what they did. Not so much that it was that effective. Every single day I change up, maybe not, but it's like, hey, changing up. This is novel. I love it. I'm gonna keep at going 100 miles an hour now.
That's right. Yeah, same thing with CrossFit. It's different every day.
Yeah. Which you guys I would trust. When I go to the local gyms, I'm like, okay, like 100 cleans in a row. I don't know about that, dude.
Yeah, it's little cringy.
Yeah. So in the last 15 minutes, maybe we'll go ahead and just scrap what I had on the list. A lot of, like I say, is mainly for me and like just trying to have novel things for athletes. What do you think of that kind of tempo type of training, and how did you incorporate, I guess would be the questions. I've read a little bit of what you did at Army in Ohio, just on some past blogs. I've been following your blog since about 2011. So, or even your posts. I'll just go on a word search like Mike Young, Athletic Lab, tempo work. But basically my history is a speed power one from a guy who was pretty knowledgeable. He's with Scott Hall at Northern Colorado when he was there for the multis. That's where I started out. He brought in a gentleman from Baylor that kind of just revamped our whole system and ended up working. We didn't really expect it to, but it did. He's the state record holder in our 400 at Colorado, and went 2073 in the 2, 678 in the 60, basically just doing tempo work. And what I've seen coaching, I try to get that happy middle ground, but I can never seem to strike it when I put in too much speed at the expense of the classic Baylor Clyde Hart prescription. And I tell myself, like, well, the guy was there for a while. He was a speed special endurance guy for years till 1990. Then he changed up. He might have learned a thing or two. So you're wise to, experiment, but don't be too shocked if his distances, his rep ranges, his recoveries were pretty spot on. I increased the challenge a little bit more than what Clyde has done, but the more I do this, the more I rethink. I'm like, well, I'm glad you took that risk. I'm glad you did, but you made them really fast, but they're not able to, spread that speed over the distance that they should be able to with things that you've done with other athletes. We've had athletes that we'd have only one of them that could run into a 26 in the 200, and they'd run a 345 in the 4x4. So it's like, that doesn't usually happen. Like that means that tempo system was good for the endurance. So I don't know, every now and then I kind of beat myself up, especially this last season. I would do 200s on Tuesday, Wednesday 450s, and then I did like 70% low to sprints with 2:45 second runs with 5 minutes, thinking that, okay, Clyde gets down to 350s and 43:45 in 5 minutes. Like, we'll just be getting there a little sooner. Didn't pay off for us, pan out. They got fast, which they needed. It was a new school that I was at, and we do speed day on Monday, but I was not pleased or not pleased, not satisfied with how they performed in the 400. So just
So
curious as to
I've
how you implemented it at Army in Ohio. And I know that Pat was down there at LSU with you guys, and I've always respected how he does it.
Yep. Yeah, he's quite tempo based, not exactly the Baylor program as well, but he's quite tempo based. Even Dennis Shaver, who's there now, or he took over for Pat, was there also, and he coaches the women, which is arguably the more successful of the programs. Follows he follows similar to what one of the systems that I did. So I was at Army for 3 years. And I was what I did, it was an interesting case study. So you basically have 6 seasons there, right? You have indoor and outdoor for both indoor and outdoor for long sprints and short sprints. So with my long sprinters, that's actually leads me in where I start with. I've never tried anything but a short to long setup with my short sprinters. So if you're a 60-meter runner through, say, a 100-meter runner, I'm going to do a short to long format, meaning acceleration first, speed from day one. We'll gradually get to top speed work. Then we'll add in some speed endurance work, maybe some special endurance work. Tempo will, of course, be sprinkled in there, but on the lower intensity days. With my long sprinters, I have tried a handful of different programs, similar to the reason you are seeing yourself, right? You see the success of the Baylor program, and even it's undeniable, right? Once you get to the 200 and 400 meters, there are many ways to roam. I think if you want to be an elite sprinter, like 100-meter sprinter, you have to sprint pretty regularly, like maximally sprint pretty regularly. Even the guys at Altus, they say, you don't have to sprint as much as people do, but they still sprint quite a bit. I mean, it's just 95% effort, 90% effort, that type of thing. And wicket runs, technical runs, that kind of thing. But once you get up to the 200, 400, things are, of course, a little bit different. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I think you get a very dramatic shift in the energetics of the event. So once you get up to 400 meters, we're talking about a really significant aerobic contribution. And at this point in time, it's much higher than what it was when I first started coaching. It used to be thought that, well, you run a 400 meters in 45 seconds and you're barely using the aerobic energy system at 45 seconds. Well, that's not true. It's like, depending on the research literature you look at, is somewhere in the range of like 20+%, maybe more. Mm-hmm. So I'm putting it through that filter. Are you a long sprinter? If you're a long sprinter, now I'm going to give you some consideration to what's the best program for you, because my short sprinters are all going to do short to long. If you're a long sprinter, I'm now looking at like where are your strengths and weaknesses, and what's your goal, right? Your goal, say, for the next season. If your goal is to, say, run 45 seconds, you're already relatively good, right? You say you're a 47 second 400 meter athlete, and your goal is to run 45 seconds and qualify for USA's. I think in that scenario, my tendency might actually be to have them do a more speed-based program, because what they're lacking is probably speed rather than any general conditioning or aerobic fitness. Now, I wholeheartedly believe that if you gave me, say, your average high school girls track and field program filled with, say, 8 sprinters, 400-meter sprinters with PRs of 65 to 80 seconds, right? That's relatively normal at the high school level, 65 to 80 seconds at the high school level. I'm probably going to do a lot more tempo work, because you're going to make a pretty significant ding in terms of their outcome. One is the race is longer, right? So the longer the race, the bigger the aerobic contribution. If I run 400 meters in 45 seconds, I'm only bathed in lactate for like 5 to 10 seconds. I don't know. If you are running for 65 seconds, now you're like swimming in lactate for a full 30 seconds. So the energy systems, pretty much the timeframes don't really change. You're dealing with like 35, say 40 seconds of kind of lactate free energy, at least to the point where it's impeding performance. So if you only run for 5 more seconds, then maybe our goal should be, how do I not have to run for 5 more seconds, but run for 2 more seconds? So let's be a little bit faster. If I'm a 70-second 400 meter athlete, then now I'm going to be spending a significant portion of my race, like 40% of my race, bathed in lactate, and a significant portion will be more aerobic, like somewhere around 35% will be an aerobic contribution to my performance. So I might spend more time with those ones. Now, when I kind of dissected the individuals who are really successful on the Baylor-like programs, what I found was that those individuals, especially long-term, are the ones that tend to be quite fast already. So if you look at, say, a Michael Johnson or Jeremy Warner, probably the 2 most notable individuals to kind of come out of that system of training. You have guys who are like Texas state champ in the 100 and 200 meters. So they're coming into those programs really, really fast from a short sprint side. And what do they need to go faster for the 400 meters? Well, they've already got the speed to run in elite 400 meters, right? I think both of those guys, Michael Johnson ended up running a 10.1 and 1932, and Jeremy Warner ran sub 19, of course. And I don't know what he ran in high school in the 100 meters, but they already had the base speed and then just needed to add the endurance for the long-term success. So I tried 3 systems. I tried long to short. That's your Clyde Hart type of setup, where we start with the longer reps, 600 meters, gradually get shorter. Followed a very similar program to what they did at Baylor. I did a short to long, the same program pretty much that I did with my short sprinters. The tempo running was longer, the speed endurance was obviously different. And then I followed what I'd call an ends to middle program. So that would be like, we do the really, really short work, we do some really, really long work, and then they gradually start to converge towards the middle. I probably found, and this might be from lack of experience maybe with these groups or with these training programs, and maybe my not ideal implementation of it, but I probably found that I was best at either extreme. When I did ends to middle, it seemed like we were doing for half the year we were doing too much work that was just really taxing. Once we got close, once we started to converge towards the middle, we're always doing, something like a fast 200 through 450. And there was never any differential between the days. And I think that can sometimes lead to overtraining. I think now, if you were to ask me which program I would use, a lot of it would come down to the level the athlete is currently at and how fast they are. If someone is a complete donkey and they're not very fast, they're like a, I don't know, 16 second 100 meter time. Yeah. You're going to have a hard time running. You're going to have a hard time ever breaking this 1 minute in the quarter mile, unless you get that 100 down to like 12.5 or 13 seconds. Yeah. So it's really, that's an interesting event area because it's clear that there are so many ways to be successful. And I think it requires a matching of the athletes' physical tendencies, like are they speed based, are they endurance based, or are they, and what is their current level? Like as I said, as you get faster, the need for aerobic work might actually decrease. And if you look at Michael Johnson's biography, he talks about some of the modifications he made, and he was relatively well known to have not followed the Baylor program to a T in his latter years.
Mhm.
Like when he set the world record. And as he's getting faster and faster and running 43:19 or whatever it was, he's doing much more speed work. This is when he was took a season to, I think, run the 100 exclusively.
Mhm.
So he got down to 44 or 43.8 or something like that using the Baylor program, but then it was adding the speed work that took him to get to 43.6. So it's rarely as clean, I think, as it sometimes comes across. And again, not to I don't by any means want to come across like I'm pooping on the Baylor program, but there's been a couple of years there where they get in 7 high school kids that run 45.
Yeah.
Right. And then who comes out running 45? Not everybody. So it doesn't work for everyone. I think if you come in as a 45-second guy with the 10.5 speed, you're probably one of those guys that comes out the other side running 43.8 or 44.5 and making the USA finals. But if you're one of these 45-second quarter milers that it has a 10.900 meter speed, you're probably, that program isn't for you. You need a more speed-based program. So it is a little tricky, and I think that's why you see in the 400 it really does require a good match of a coaching philosophy and the type of athlete that they're dealing with. I don't know if you remember when Jeremy Warner he stayed with Baylor, but he switched away from Clyde Hart, and I think he was doing a little bit different programming, and it was basically the end of his career. I mean, I don't think he ran within half a second again. So the most extreme examples are the ones where the philosophy matches what the athlete needs. And there's less so than I think in the 100 meters or your marathon or the extremes. The more you get towards that middle of that energetic spectrum, the more there's going to be a couple different ways to do it, and it's going to really matter where the athlete is coming from in terms of their physical capacity.
Right. Excellent. Awesome. Well, it looks like I'm about an hour, Mike, so I really appreciate your time, man, and thanks for pouring in, and been a little off the cuff every now and then. That was cool. I'll definitely be scheduling another one, and yeah, I appreciate it. So
awesome. Thanks, Shane. Appreciate it. Good meeting.
Good to meet you too, man.
Take care.
All right, see you, Mike.